To Windy City YouTube. What's up, Ben Heisler?
What's up, Carm?
Managing editor, bet-sided, longtime Chicago Bears fan. Herb Howard, who's at the press conference today, is supposed to join us at some point here. Fingers crossed that we get Herb in here. But look, I listened and I liked some parts. I like an emotional general manager. I like a guy who, when he thinks about his journey at 36 and can't even say the words Brett Veach, because Veach means so much to him, and who knows what he told the Chicago Bears about Ryan Poles. Like, I appreciate that guy. Whenever, someday somebody asks me, who helped you, Carm, I'll probably start crying and won't be able to say the words David Kaplan or whoever the hell else will pop into my head at that point. But so I liked that, Ben. And then Matt Eberflus got up there, and I'm sure he's a fine fellow, and I'm not trying to say that he can't do the job, because maybe he can. But that was a lot of coach speak, Ben. A lot of coach speak.
Yeah, it was a ton of coach speak, to the point where I wasn't sure if you were playing a little bit of coach speak bingo. Like, if somebody at the press conference was just going to stand up and shout out. I'll start with Ryan Poles, because that's an area that I feel like I have a better connection to, being in Kansas City and still having some familiar sources in and around that team. Everything that I've heard about him, Carm, has stood out to me as someone who just gets it. And right away, the big difference to me between what I saw from Ryan Poles and Ryan Pace, as we play the old Matt and Ryan game yet again in Chicago, there's an element of quiet confidence about him and accountability. I think Ryan Poles won't have an issue telling you if he got something wrong, which general managers will do in the NFL. It's so much of it is a swing. You're taking chances. You're trying to be opportunistic. Only one team can win a Super Bowl at the end of the year. And Ryan, despite being a fairly young guy, has come from multiple avenues in Kansas City that was really low. And then once he left, it was at a point where it was much higher. He was very thoughtful in his answers without giving you nothing. And you got a lot of nothing, a lot of emptiness from Ryan Pace. So I think from that standpoint, trusting him and trusting that he's going to work well with somebody that is going to accept that vision is important to me. And maybe Matt Eberflus behind the media walls and the microphones is very, very different. But I just heard a lot of things, Carm, that just rang a lot of bells. I heard the hits concept. We were in radio for a long time. We always talked about playing the hits, but man, when you lead with acronyms in your press conference, it just feels very collegey. And I couldn't escape the old Illinois coach, Tim Beckman, out of my mind. Hearing him speak and go through it, he might be a very good head coach, and every indication of the staff that he's bringing on and the person who hired him and Ryan Poles, everybody is glowing about Matt Eberflus, but just those alarm bells in my head started going off the moment acronyms and concepts of football and all the different aspects of educate the players and motivate them and finding what inspires them. These are grown men making a lot of money. Like, there needs to be a better way to get that message forward. Has to be.
Right, and we're going to have Herb Howard. Let me actually bring Herb Howard in, who does a great job covering the Bears, who I believe was either at the press conference today or on Zoom. Herb, were you in attendance?
Yeah, I was there. I was in the building today.
Okay, so when Eberflus goes into the coach speak, Herb, are you looking around the room and seeing, is anybody having a reaction? Or were you like, did everybody just kind of sit there very firm and like, okay, we knew this was coming. We knew we were going to be Eberflused, and that doesn't mean he can't do the job. This is who he is. What was going on as far as just like the vibe in there?
I think it was disappointing. I think that, you enter these things, you kind of hope for something fresh, something new, something different. And even if you anticipate, more coach speak, you just kind of hope that this will be refreshing, something kind of different. He'll be more honest, more open, more sincere with his answers. But then, like, you come in and it's the acronyms and it's the coach speak, general coach speak, and it was like, Ryan Poles, he seemed to be a little bit more authentic, a little bit more open, a little bit more willing to engage honestly. But I don't know, Matt Eberflus seemed very, very coach speaky. And what it's not so much what that means in terms of us as media, but how does that play in the locker room if that's really how you are, if that's really who you're going to be?
So, right, Herb, phenomenal point. And by the way, check out Herb on Twitter and check out hashtag the Bigs, where you're doing great work. And I've heard you on the radio a bunch and excited to have you on here. And I don't know if you've ever met Ben, but Ben's a kingpin of his own, managing editor, BetSide, and everybody out of YouTube land. We love you. Listen, I'm going back to a moment in Matt Nagy time right now where they were 5-1 last year. They're flying back on the plane. And at the press conference the next day, he's telling everybody it was just an awesome plane ride. I mean, some guys were eating, some guys were sleeping, some guys were reading. And, you walk up and I'm sitting there like, dude, I think you're a nice guy. I really do. Even though some of that is in question now with all the some of the stuff that's come out after he's been fired. But like, this isn't junior college. This ain't high school. Like, you're just explaining a plane ride. And to your point, Herb, it's not about what, the media thinks, but in the room, that is not going to play. Guys are going to be looking around like, who the hell is this guy? It's the same thing that happened with Mark Trestman. So you talk to Bears guys who were on that team, Earl Bennett, who done a bunch of these type of things with. They were like amazed by the incompetence and the ridiculousness that was Mark Trestman. So I don't know, Ben. I mean, either of you guys just jump in here, but it does make you worried. It makes you a little bit worried. Whereas Poles, I felt fine to that point. Like, it's like, okay, Ryan Poles, you're an emotional, grounded, you're respecting the position guy, and he said some really good things too about, look, we're going to take guys' strengths and we're going to do what they do well. Yeah, and that made that made a ton of sense. That was like, okay, Matt Nagy didn't do that. That's a win right there.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. And this is one thing, every coach is going to have their philosophies and kind of have their buzzwords or whatnot. And it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to be a team that takes the ball away. That's fine, right? But when it's this hits principle and this hit is like, I don't know how that plays with grown rich men. Like, I don't know how well that plays. And so I'm with Ben. Like, you come in here, you leading with this acronym. It's like, all right, coach.
I'm with you. I think that's the key element here is you might be able to, and I think to a certain extent, a lot of NFL head coaches will try to establish their own identity from the very beginning, especially first-time head coaches, right? You're trying to set a precedent. You're trying to say and act like you've been there before when the reality is you haven't really been there before. And he gets going with talking about getting the track shoes on by the time practice starts. And again, if you want to run a little bit more intense practices, that's fine. That's your prerogative. You're the damn head football coach of the Chicago Bears. The key is sustainability. If you're going to be a culture changer, how are you going to make that culture last long term? A lot of somebody like Mike Tomlin, when he was hired in Pittsburgh, defensive minded guy, young, extremely bright, somebody that was going to command the room right away. And now you've seen how it's worked out over time. So many winning seasons, the best NFL coach since 2007 in covering the spread, maybe more so for guys like me who are betting on somebody like Tomlin. But what it shows you is that there is an aspect of accountability and they hold themselves to it and they rise above in aspects where they probably shouldn't be favored. My concern about Eberflus, like you mentioned, is how is that going to be a culture that's sustained over time? Maybe 1-2 years, the defense plays over their skis a little bit. They force a ton of turnovers. But you know what team forced the number one amount of turnovers? Was Matt Nagy and the Chicago Bears in 2018. They led the NFL in takeaways. And then that was a stat that did not hold up over time. And especially when Vic Fangio left, you brought in Chuck Pagano. That defense changed a little around. And Sean Desai got him back a little bit too. They were a top 10 defense this year. I just don't know how much of this can be sustained over time. Maybe clearly Ryan Poles believes that this is somebody that can come in, be a CEO type. The defensive coordinator is going to call plays. The offensive coordinator is going to call plays. And that is a step in the right direction. But you need to make sure that this is sustainable. And what I saw from him didn't feel like someone that I would want to play for a long time, because I feel like that message at some point is going to ring a little bit hollow.
Yeah, I
How
like the
did you?
comp that you gave with Mike Tomlin. I'm sorry.
No,
I like the comp that you gave with Mike Tomlin because that's when it matters, right? Everybody can coach from the front. And I think that if they're winning, his message will be fine, right? And everybody will be fine with the hits thing and everything. But when you fall on hard times, do you have the ability to right the ship? Can you reach them then? And that's what Mike Tomlin is so good at. When they have a 2-3 game losing streak, somehow you look up at the end of the season and week 17, week 18, they still have a shot at the playoffs. It's like, I don't even know how they got here. They weren't even good for real. I think that's what's going to matter.
so I'm going to fail this test, and I hate to put you guys on the spot, but does anybody remember what the hits actually is? And he had two T's and I think two S's. Does anybody remember what the hits were? Because I don't. I've already forgotten the hits, which is I think is going to be similar to Bears players. Anybody got it?
It was hustle, intensity, take the ball away,
takeaways,
yeah,
and then
smart.
Yeah.
Hustle, intensity, takeaways, smarts. I'm Matt Eberflus.
To the players' credit, though, they at least get it on the wall. Like, we're just going off of what he's told us, and for some of us, we'd already tuned him out in the first 30 seconds.
Do we think that this was completely like the Bears are putting it out there that Ryan Poles told them to talk to Matt Eberflus, and this is was primo guy number one versus like, hey Ryan, these are the three guys we like, pick who you like. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like this was a clean slate from it. That's not how it feels, but they are trying to sell that part.
I don't have any reason to not believe Ryan Poles. He hasn't given me personally. I can only judge the man off of what he says, right? Yes, there's certain aspects about how the Bears have run this process before that can make me at least feel like it's okay. Something isn't being, like, the message isn't being received along the way. I think what happened is that he did have a list of candidates. Eberflus was one that's mentioned. You have to remember that Trace Armstrong's role in all of this, right? The kingmaker in all of this is putting the pieces together. It's part of the reason that the staff is looking as, I don't want to call it impressive because I have no idea if it's going to work, but it does look good from the initial consideration, bringing in somebody like Luke Getsy from Green Bay that was somebody that's fairly accomplished, that was going to get opportunities to get some decent offensive coordinator positions moving forward, to get a chance for him to call plays. Who he brings on for his defensive coordinator, bringing Ian Cunningham from Philadelphia. Like, there's some good names here that Trace Armstrong, and for anyone who's unfamiliar with him, he's the president, he's an agent that's helping keep these relationships together. So from that standpoint, I don't have a reason to doubt Ryan Poles when he says that this was his decision. I'm a little curious that he didn't want to talk to somebody like Brian Flores, who he played with at Boston College. I thought that was a little bit interesting. I was a little bit surprised that maybe they didn't want to have a conversation with Eric Bieniemy, who is known for a long time in Kansas City. Even just from an optics perspective, to see him bring in and challenge a couple more names that he would want to talk to directly, I found to be interesting. But I do think there was a communication where he said, I like Eberflus. And they said, great. We also really like Eberflus. We think you two of you guys should have a conversation together. So I don't doubt Ryan Poles when he had the autonomy to make this decision, but I would have liked to have seen him add a few more names to the list.
Ben went deep there, Herb. I felt all of it.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that, it does seem like a really, really strong coincidence, for, him to, of all the people in the world, right, for him to want the guy that they had already had as a finalist, that seems a bit much. But I do think that there was probably some overlap during his interview process that says, okay, what are some coaches that you like? And he was probably on that list. And he's like, great, he's on our list too. But I just think that, you get a job like a GM of the Chicago Bears, I would imagine that there's somebody that you kind of just always want to interview. And I asked him that directly, but like Ben said, I can only trust what he said. And when I asked him, he said, no, I like Matt Eberflus. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. You know what I mean?
He was fairly definitive too, Herb. Like, it was like a very short, emphatic statement. It's like, I didn't need to, I had him. And so it was almost like an end of the line at like a rom-com. I was like, oh my goodness, this is just, it's a little bit powerful. But I think we kind of just have to take him at his word there, right? There's no other indication that I think we can go on at this point moving forward. And the one other aspect here is that there is a Kansas City connection to Matt Eberflus, and that's Chris Ballard, who everybody thought was going to be the GM instead of Ryan Pace. They end up bringing on Pace. Ballard ends up going to Indianapolis, builds a strong team. I know that they didn't finish the season the way that most anticipated with that bad loss to Jacksonville, but most would indicate that Ballard is in that top tier amongst some of the better GMs in the game. And it's a guy that knows Ryan Poles about as well as anybody. So I would imagine there's been some overlap in that conversation as well. And maybe there is some concepts that work together between the two of them.
So let's just talk about human nature on that one, okay? And also a connection between Matt Nagy and Matt Eberflus, because Matt Nagy showed up in Chicago right after the Chiefs blew a 21-3 lead on the Titans in the playoffs and completely turtled in the second half, lose the game 22-21. Here comes our offensive coordinator, Ed O'Bradovich, who I do Bears postgame with on WGN Radio, screaming about how the hell do they hire the guy who blew the playoff game. Now you go and you hire the Colts guy who gets smoked by the Jaguars. That ain't a great look either. But to the Ballard point that I'm trying to tie together here, I understand that we're all trying to look out for our guys in this world, but we also do look out for number one. And if you're Chris Ballard and you love Matt Eberflus and you really want him coaching your defense, do you think you go out of your way to tell Ryan Poles, like, this is the guy you got to hire? If you really wanted him there, I think we might have lost Herbs. If I think he might be frozen. So, Ben, does that make sense? Because that, like, look, man, if I don't want to lose a guy as much as I like to be a good guy in life and promote people, I see her moving around right now. Like, I don't know if I'm promoting him to be the. I might be a little more quiet than what's being reported. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's a fair point and a fair contentious point to bring to the table here. I also think that, Ballard was planning on making some changes anyway and looking internal. I don't think that Eberflus was going to come back. I'm not saying that he was the lame duck anyway. But I do think that, remember, he brought in Eberflus when they thought McDaniels was coming in, and McDaniels didn't end up coming on. They brought in Frank Reich, and then the two of them worked together and had a really good working relationship. I do think Ballard is somebody that is happy for the success of his coaches. I don't think he's thrilled that they're bringing on the other Borgonzi brother into the mix to go and coach, because that's somebody that coached up Darius Leonard. Darius Leonard's a stud. But I don't necessarily buy into that. I think all these guys have good working relationships, and you would think that a general manager would believe that he has a defensive system that can be effective, even if they're defensive coordinator. You have to prepare for that. And the Bears, if Luke Getsy brings Justin Fields to the level that he's capable of, he's going to be a head coach somewhere.
He'll be gone.
Yeah, exactly. So you as a general manager and as a head coach need to know that I'm talking in football speak, that your system is going to be sustainable if you lose one of these key members of your staff.
That part of it's like, look, man, if Luke Getsy comes over here and he's phenomenal and Justin Fields is cooking and he gets hired in 2 years or 1 year, great. That means we had a phenomenal year, and hopefully the coaches underneath him understand the system, and let's go. I'm not worried about that aspect of it.
Yeah, ideally, you kind of want that to happen, right? Because it's just a sign of production and productivity. And so I think that if you have a good defense, then you should anticipate your DC is going to be gone soon. If you have a good offense, same thing there. And what you will want to then have in place is to say, okay, now can my linebackers coach become my DC? Can my secondary coach become my DC? And I think that we saw that here, in terms of how Sean Desai was able to rise up to being a DC. I think that will ultimately be what they would hope to happen in Indy, unless they go with the old coach to the new place.
And by the way, identify on your staff who's a stud, i.e. Brandon Staley, and don't let him get out the door like the Bears did. And I don't care how the Chargers season ended. That was a miss on the Bears' part. Let me read. And Bears fans, we're here for you. I know we're supposed to be excited. I know this is supposed to be a great day. I'm not trying to throw all sorts of shade on the process, but I mean, I know you guys are all feeling the same way too. But here's a comment from Justin Fields, which I thought was interesting, by the way. Here we go with Poles and Eberflus, and then we're gonna roll out George McCaskey. You can talk to him again, and then we're gonna bring you Justin Fields. So at least they understand that who's the most important person in the franchise right now. And this was Fields afterwards, one of the quotes. Quote, "It's important for coaches to run plays that their players are good at running. Thank you. They already have a base idea what my strengths are, but me being able to communicate with them and tell them what my strengths are, we can get on the same page. But there's going to be some new stuff that we didn't run last year that works and I've never run before. And by the time training camp comes around, I'll know it," which is a nice way of saying that the stuff last year sucked. But it's a good way of saying that I think it sounds to me like he's dialing up the optimism here a little bit.
Yeah, that seems to be in line with what Ryan Poles said too. You find out what our players do well, and then we do that a lot until we get better at the other things. And so I think that it would behoove the Bears offensively to figure out exactly what Justin does well, and then do that a lot. Incorporate some more read option. Let him use athleticism a little bit more than the Bears chose to do last year. As he continues to develop in other areas, that only makes sense to me.
Carm, I think we had the conversation last week when we were talking about how Nagy's system, when having the right players in it, is a beautiful offensive football scheme. Like, we've seen it in Kansas City for the last several years, but you also have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and a top 5 offensive line. The problem is that maybe the comparison is like when you're a great athlete and you're trying to figure out why other athletes can't do what you're able to do. Like they just don't see things the same way as you do. And I think Nagy saw the Kansas City offense as, well, of course it works. I've seen it work. But the problem is you're using the Bears offense to try to run it with a bottom 5 offensive line, a good running back, but nowhere near the same type of level at the quarterback and wide receiver and tight end position. So he missed out on the opportunity to adjust the scheme to your quarterback and tailor it to your personnel, because in his head, I'm like, I know this works and it's going to work. And we're going to figure out whatever ways we can to make this work because I know it works. And if it doesn't work, then something else is wrong because it's not the offense system, because the offense system works. This is about tailoring it to your actual personnel and the strengths of your team. He was trying to run Andy Reid's offense with Mitch Trubisky and Justin Fields, who didn't have first team reps all throughout the preseason. It just didn't add up. It didn't make sense. This makes more sense.
So, and it was interesting too that Poles said that he talked to Nagy and, hey, what'd you do right? What'd you do wrong? Why'd you get fired? What would you do differently? What's your recommendation? Which I think is great that Matt would have the conversation, that Ryan would reach out. Hey, listen, I mean, this is a fraternity. You might be in my seat someday. So all that makes sense. I'd be very interested to hear what Matt said. Like, what did he do wrong? And how he sees it and whether he's actually processed all of it. But to the whole offensive coordinator and system thing and Luke Getsy, I like whatever. Aaron Rodgers has been incredible, so I suppose that's supposed to give Bears fans confidence. But there's part of me that's like, that's Aaron Rodgers. That doesn't mean it's going to transfer here. And I'm looking at, Baltimore. I mean, Greg Roman, whoever he was thrown out there this year, Lamar Jackson gets hurt. Tyler Huntley comes in and he's strong. And then Josh Johnson's got to play, and he played well. So I don't know if Greg Roman as a head coach might have been a little tall, but that's what we're looking for. Can you figure out what works for this guy and doing it on the fly like that? That's super ass impressive. And I mean, I don't know how you guys is there confidence in Getsy from you guys? I'm struggling with the Rodgers component for me.
I gotta see. I'll wait and see. Now, certainly, he's obviously been around a system that works well, and he's seen what great quarterback play looks like at the highest level. And so I'm sure he has some of that in him. But I'll have to wait and see before I make a judgment on him holistically as a coach. But I think that there's a lot of ways to win a football game. There are lots of ways to win football games. You don't just have to win it one particular way. And I think that a lot of coaches, fall into, I have to be able to win it this way. This is my system, and it has to go this way. It doesn't have to go that way. Bill Belichick is the best coach in the league. He's won all different kinds of ways. If we got to throw it 50 times, we'll throw it 50 times. We got to run it 50 times, we'll run it 50 times. But it's all dictated by his roster. Who's on the team? If we've got, Wes Welker and Randy Moss and all, then we'll break every passing record there is. But if not, then we'll rotate 6 running backs through here and still win games. There's a different way to do it. You just got to be willing to adjust and have the ability to do so.
Right. And to Herb's point too, Carm, not only is it about tailoring, the type of offense and how you try to play to win to your personnel, but, talk about the adjustments within the actual game itself. And how many times did the Bengals in the second half of yesterday's game send 3 guys in to try to rush the passer, leave 8 guys back? And the Chiefs would rush on first down, and then they would pass, and it'd be incomplete, and they'd punt it away, and they gave the Bengals the opportunity to go back and win that game and come back from 18 down. Everything is about adjustments in the game and trying to make sure that you have the more opportunistic play on the other side of the field. Same thing goes on the defensive side of the ball. If you're not going to be able to adjust, then you're screwed either way, regardless of the personnel that you have. So as long as your coach is willing to make and recognize those adjustments over the course of the game, then you're going to have a chance.
Ready to Ball podcast. The play action offense and run game will be more multi and quarterback design runs. Hey, listen, I'm down for that. Let's get some RPOs going here. It always scares me when you get a quarterback on the move, but that's what he's good at. And I actually let me take that back, because he threw I'm not 100% certain that we don't want Justin Fields just if at least in a moving pocket more so than trying to tear up teams on the ground. That doesn't tend to end well. Dudes get clipped. They're done. And when he was cooking at times this year, those balls are on the money. This is not – I don't want him to get pigeonholed into he's a running quarterback. That doesn't seem right to me. On the other side of it, it's I'm not sure we have the right guy or not. We did not see enough this year. It's up in the air whether or not Fields is what the Bears need him to be. That's kind of how I'm seeing the quarterback position. But you definitely needed to make a change to find out if he is or not. It wasn't going to work the way it was going. That's so good for the Bears. Change for change's sake.
Yeah, I think he's got all the tools. I think he can make all the throws. There were some special throws, like elite level throws that he made this year. I think particularly one against the Steelers. He hit Cole Kmet down the seam with a just perfectly placed ball that was up and down. I think he's got the ability to put the ball over the linebackers and in front of the safeties. He can hit the corner routes. He can throw it on the move. I think he can make all of the throws. I'm not saying that he's strictly a running quarterback and that he can't beat you from the pocket. I'm just saying that he has special ability as an athlete, and you should incorporate that a little bit more. You should use that some more, especially when you have David Montgomery to run it with him. And so I think that they should absolutely just allow him to be the athlete that he is. He's a phenomenal athlete. Let him use it.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I agree. I think what it comes back to for me is I think about the system that Lou Getsy's going to come in from, right? It's under Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur was with Sean McVay, under Kyle Shanahan, under Mike Shanahan. So you have a lot of movable parts with a very physical offensive line that sets the tone with a really good running game. And for everybody that says, well, these are your young coaches that are very pass heavy. Sean McVay ran the ball, I think 37 times in that playoff win against Arizona, ran it again about 30 times in their next playoff win. They're using up runs to set up all sorts of play action. So there's that base of understanding, you can be physical up front, have a solid running game, but then take all sorts of different ways to be able to move your quarterback around, cut the field in half, open it up. You can expand the playbook in a wide variety of ways. And Kyle Shanahan moved up how many picks to go get Trey Lance to run that offense? This is the same offense that you're going to be running in Chicago. And now you have somebody with Justin Fields that has a lot more experience, both at the collegiate level and now at the pro level, to be able to run that offense. And from a skills perspective, you can make the argument that he has just as good of a skill set and talent wise as somebody as Trey Lance, maybe even better. So I think you can use him in a wide variety of ways and make it a really workable offense for him while still being able to have a solid running game to take some pressure off of him as well.
Let's just end with two things. Number one, Bears' biggest need right now is, you could go a lot of ways with this. I would be tempted to say playmakers, because Darnell Mooney, great year, 1,000 yards receiving, all that. Who's with him? A-Rob to me feels like that's over. So, and it's probably best for him to move on. So who else is there? But you can also say up front, or you could point to the aging defense. There's a lot of ways we could go here.
Yeah, I think that they did themselves a huge disservice, and I know that they had Matt Nagy's under pressure to try to win. He's trying to save his job, but I think that he did the organization a huge disservice by not finding out if Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum are your tackles going forward. Because if you were able to answer that question last year, then you go into this season without not being a question anymore. And then you absolutely go look for weapons. How can we get more weapons on the field for Justin? But I think that until you're absolutely certain that you can protect him, that was going to remain the number one issue for me. And so I don't know how they're going to answer that question in the springtime or even in the summertime. And so going into free agency and going into the draft, I think the O-line is still a huge question mark. And, shout out to Jason Peters. He came in, played serviceable football for them, 39, 40 years old. Good job. Larry Borum, when he had his opportunities, he looked fine. But I think that once Tevin Jenkins was able to go, he should have gotten every single rep there was and said, thank you, Jason Peters. We appreciate you. But right now, we got to find out if this kid is going to be the tackle next year. You can go home if you want. You can stay if you want. But we got to let this kid play because we need to answer this question before the offseason comes.
Yeah, and Jason Peters, for the record, wouldn't have cared. Thank you. Appreciate it. I wouldn't, I got to be on the field and you paid me well. I was in a fishing boat. I get it. And if he didn't get it, I mean, that'd be ridiculous. There goes the light. Right. Doesn't matter. Right. But it's not like, I don't think Jason Peters would have cared.
No. Of course he would have.
Go ahead, Ben. Get the light back.
Yeah, I think it comes down to two positions. You got to figure out who your left tackle is going to be. Because I think Jenkins was probably better designed to play on the right side than on the left side. And what I saw from him wasn't particularly impressive. Borum, when he played, had some stretches that I thought he looked better than what I thought for a 5th round pick out of Mizzou. You need to get some more help for Fields downfield. Mooney could. I don't look at Mooney as that clear cut number one guy. He had a really nice season. I think he's a talented dude, but so much of the NFL right now is about mismatches and moving guys and figuring out the place for him. Like, Mooney is an outside player. Like, maybe you move him in the slot a little bit and you can find some mismatches, but that's not what the Bears used him for. So I don't know if all of a sudden his ceiling is going to take off next year because he's in an offense that's likely going to, I mean, it has to be better. They were the worst offense in the NFL. So you need to have a clear-cut number one wide receiver for Fields, and you need to be able to protect him. And so I think you have to figure out where that's going to be, whether you truly trust Tevin Jenkins. I don't think you can give up on him this quickly, but you need some more depth at the offensive line. Like, you can't call Jason Peters again next year. Like, it's not happening. So figure out some depth on the offensive line, put him in a more favorable position where he's not scrambling and running for his life. His first real NFL start, he got sacked 9 times. Like, that can't ever happen again, and put him in that type of spot. So fix the offensive line, get him another playmaker on offense. And then I think you can have one more year with this defense unless you decide you're going to try and sell everybody off.
I want to end with something that's completely unfair. 3 years from now, will we be saying Eber bust or Eber love you? I don't know. Something, whatever. That's not good, but we get the point. If you had to bet right now, one press conference on January the 31st, 2022, with Justin Fields talking last today and George McCaskey getting in there and George going to the airport to pick him up because he wanted to show Ryan Poles that he really cares. Good job, George. I love that out of you. Good for you. Do what you can in life. But feel free to weigh in here. I love how Herb is really in deep thought over this. So Herb, take it. What do you think? Did the Bears get it right? 13 general managers in 14 days or whatever the hell George told us. I mean, they talked to everybody. Did they get it right?
If I had to bet on it, I'd say it'll work. I think that he's a defensive coach. And I think that there are some pieces in place on that side of the ball for him to be able to come in and be effective on that side of the ball. Now, he's going to have to be able to match that with in-game decision-making. It's the adjustments Ben was talking about during the game. Can he do those things? But I think that he'll be able to establish a defensive identity that will give you a chance to win the game. And that's all you can really hope for, just a chance to win football games. And I think that if he can get his defense in place and he can build around the Roquan Smith, and he's still got Khalil Mack, and you've got Robert Quinn, and you've got a good young corner in Jalen Johnson, I think he can put a defense in place that will allow them to be competitive in games. And then what happens on the offensive side of the ball? So if I had to say today, 3 years from now, we say they got the right guy, I would lean towards Jets, but it's like 51-49 lean. You know what I mean?
Hey, I think that Bears fans should love that answer. Give me a 51. That's better than we normally do. What do you think, Ben?
I will be very curious as to whether or not, here's how I ultimately see this. Eberflus either is a solid head coach that can make, a 5 to 8 year run where you get some playoff appearances, maybe Fields starts to really take that turn, and you start to feel a little bit more secure because there are actual good pieces in place for him to be successful. He's delegating. He's going to develop a culture. The defense is going to start taking the ball away a little bit. Like, all these things are really good things. I think our biggest qualm right now with Eberflus is the coach speaky stuff, right? And that's not even necessarily fair for us to evaluate him. Like, it's annoying, and we wonder whether it's going to translate. But if the players play hard for him, that's really all that matters. And you're bringing in an exciting, offensive-minded coordinator out of Green Bay that I think people can feel better about compared to the regime from the past. So this either lasts a decent period of time through Fields going maybe into, age 26, 27, getting that next contract, and then you look at it as a success. Or Eberflus goes full on Eberflus and the team just completely dismisses him, and you have the next Jim Boylan coaching football in the NFL. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think there's too many smart people around him to have made that type of a decision, but it's either going to flame out very, very fast, or this ends up being a solid hire for a decent amount of years. So I'll bet with her, but I'll say that this works out.
Now, let me just tell a Jim Boylan story on the way out here. When the Bulls hired Boylan, I'm at the Advocate Center. It's his first ever press conference. This is obviously pre-COVID. Things were normal. I loved my life. Pax is up there introducing Boylan. He's standing there where the media's huddled around, and Boylan is standing with us in the media and leaning in to hear what Pax is saying and what the questions are. And it's like Carm, David Schuster, Casey Johnson, Boylan. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is straight weird. So Eberflus was a little bit weird today, but he wasn't that weird. So when we bring up Boylan, just know the Boylan start, which was not as high profile as what today was really awkward, and you could just sense it immediately. This dude, I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying, Herb, earlier. Like, the Chicago Bulls looked all around the NBA at that time and figured out that the best coach in the NBA somehow miraculously was sitting on their bench. How did that happen? And whereas, it's a miracle. Ryan Poles thought the same best three coach was Matt Eberflus. What's the coincidence there? That's a little bit odd, but fingers crossed. That this will work out. Herb, appreciate you jumping on. Awesome to have you on for the first time. Ben, I work with you every day. You're awesome too. Let's do it again, guys. Thanks for being on to Windy. Bear down. Hopefully they got it right. And hey, Herb, where can people find you the most? Where can people catch your work?
The most at It's the Bigs. At It's the Bigs, where I do most of the tweeting. So follow me there, man. Carm, I really appreciate it. It's been fun. Thanks for having me, Ben. Pleasure, man.
Yeah, likewise, Herb. This was fun.
Good times, y'all. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button. New channel. We're growing it. Be an early subscriber. We're going to be giving away a Fields jersey, fingers crossed, coming up. So get on in here. Follow Herb. Follow Ben. Follow at the Carm. Don't ask me about Jim Harbaugh right now. I trust my source. I am trusting my source. He's going to Miami.
I was gonna say
And
this
if he
would be the
doesn't,
ideal time to break even more news, Carmen. If you got something, you got to give it to the people. They've been with us for almost 40 minutes now.
I don't have it. I was told yesterday it was 100%. I've checked in all day. No change. I'm getting yelled at on Twitter, basically telling me to, well, not even basically telling me to go to hell. If I get it wrong, I'll give back the breaking news. Either way, I'm giving it back to Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and all those guys. But I felt it was my duty to put the Harbaugh to Miami out there because, hey, when you're told 100% by an incredibly good source, I had to tweet it. Now I'm living in the terrifying world of am I wrong? And it's not good. So I'm not looking for sympathy. Maybe I am. Breaking news thing. That is an interesting life to live. All right, we're done. Herb, thanks again. Ben, thanks again. And most importantly, thanks for watching, you guys. And hey, bear down. Go Matt Eberflus. Go Ryan Poles. Thank you, George McCaskey. Change for change's sake. We'll see you next time.